Three journalists from Al Jazeera English News Network are facing prison terms of between 7 and 10 years, charged by an Egyptian court with aiding the Muslim Brotherhood. Hello, everyone. Welcome to your Monday lunch break. I'm Tanya Rivero. Correspondent Peter Gresti, Bureau Chief Mohammed Fahmy, and producer Bayer Mohammed, who faces 10 years for also allegedly possessing ammunition, are the three sentenced journalists. And with more on the fallout from this case that is raising serious questions about Egypt's respect for a free press, we are joined by Sunjeev Bery, Amnesty International USA's Advocacy Director for the Middle East and North Africa. Sanjay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So your organization has steadfastly condemned this ruling. What kind of precedent is it setting going forward if this sentence is upheld?
This is just the latest example of how Egyptian authorities and the Egyptian judiciary are cracking down on human rights across Egypt. And this sham trial and this sham verdict are more dark examples of how press freedom is being crushed in Egypt today. At the end of the day right now, it appears that the Egyptian authorities are sending the message that if a reporter or a media outlet offers a narrative or a critique that differs with the government's perspective of events, those reporters face terrible consequences.
And Sanjeev, what is the chance for an appeal here? Obviously, this case is drawing international criticism.
Yes, a number of governments have called in their Egyptian ambassadors to ask tough questions about this verdict, and it's definitely something that's shocked the international community. From here on out, there is a lengthy, drawn-out appeals process, but the thing to remember is that these three journalists are now in prison, and they have been given prison sentences. So while there may be appeals ahead, they are sitting in jail simply for doing their jobs, and the convictions and the sentences come after 6 months in which they've already been detained.
And it should be noted they are also in one of Egypt's most notorious prisons.
Yes, Egypt's prison system in general is notorious for torture, abuse, and all kinds of horrific outcomes. And it's just yet another example of how Egyptian authorities and the Egyptian judiciary are no longer acting with any basic respect for fairness or due process. And it's part of this larger crackdown that we're seeing in Egypt today.
And it's not just journalists at risk. As you mentioned, thousands have been wrongfully imprisoned since the violence began in Cairo. How bad is the situation on the ground there?
Well, the numbers are pretty shocking. We're talking about some 1,400 people who have been killed over the past year in protest-related violence. We're talking about, according to unnamed Egyptian officials who spoke to the Associated Press, some 16,000 people who have been detained in the last year, mass death sentences in mass trials that have no element of basic fairness. So it's a major problem, and it's stunning to see something like this happening, especially this latest verdict, just one day after Secretary of State John Kerry was in Egypt, ostensibly to talk about human rights and repairing the U.S.-Egypt relationship.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that visit there, because how can the country's leader, how can the ruling courts justify controlling the image of what's going on in their country right now?
The language that they are using is the language of condemning many of their critics and opposition groups as quote-unquote terrorists. But this is pretty ridiculous. Both folks who have been affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, the prior political party in power, as well as people who are both critical of the Muslim Brotherhood and the current president, have been jailed, silenced, or banned from participating in politics. And it's important to remember that Egypt is a major military ally of the U.S. government. They receive some $1.2 billion a year in military aid, and it's time for there to be some human rights accountability in that relationship. We can't just have business as usual, where the Secretary of State visits one day, and then the next day, prominent journalists are thrown in jail for years.
All right, Sanjeev, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.